So now that we have the dialog box almost ready, we need to add the functionality to make it dynamic, scalable, and also add the ability to have options inside the text box which the player can choose from. So we'll be covering that now. So I'm gonna quickly access the dialog box here and I'm gonna change the size of it. So you can see that if I go beyond, it would simply go to the next line. So that's working fine. But if I select the dialog box and add a component called content size fitter, and I'm gonna change the vertical fit to preferred size, and I'm gonna add a vertical layout group. So I'm gonna select the tail, and you can see that it disappeared when I added the vertical layout group. To bring it back, I'm gonna add a component called layout element, and I'm gonna tick the ignore layout. And once I do that, I get my text back, but you can't see the tail itself. So that's because it's here. So we'll have to do the same thing that we did earlier, where we assigned it towards the bottom right, like that. And once we do that, we can go back to the vertical layout group and apply the padding that we need. So now if I select the dialog text and if I copy this and paste it multiple times, you can see that it's working properly. It would automatically scale. So I'm gonna quickly change the pivot to 1 and 0 for a moment and show you the difference. So if I select the text again, you can see that the box stays here, but if I change the pivot to something like this, and if I delete all of this and copy paste, you can see that there's some offset that's going on here, and it goes up every time I paste. So that's the effect of the pivot that we have. So if we want that to be precise, then we'll need to make the tail as the parent and put the dialog box as a child. So what I'm gonna do is revert it back to 1 and 0. And if you remember, we have added this offset position for the X and Y. So if I assign the play here and hit play, we'll dynamically change the text in the game mode. So right now you can see that it's 150 on the Y, but that's not enough. So I'm gonna quickly increase it to around 200, and this is going to be 65. And now if I duplicate the text inside the box, it's gonna stay exactly where the player is and still keep the text dynamic. So that's a trick that you can use. So once we have that, we can go ahead and look at the options. I'll just apply the offsets. So now that we have a vertical layout group assigned to the dialog box, we can have multiple lines of options also available. So I'm going to quickly add a UI button, and I'm going to go to the text and change this one to a new font, and also apply a content size fitter for this one. So once we have that, we can go ahead and create the options. So I'm gonna duplicate this dialog text and name it option, and this will be a prefab because we'll be spawning options whenever there is a choice being made, and that will be done through a Playmaker FSM. But for now, I'm gonna select this option and I'm gonna decrease its width, and let's call this option 1. And you can see that even if I decrease it from this side, it's going towards the right side, and that's because the vertical layout group is set to upper left, and if I make it to upper right, it's gonna go to that side. So we are going to leave it at upper left, but we are also gonna create a UI image just beside this one. So we'll need an arrow for the option menu. So I'm gonna quickly go to Inkscape and create a simple arrow. I'm gonna disable the stroke paint, and I'm gonna export only this one as arrow.png, and this one will be sprite 2D and UI. I'll leave the sprite mode as single and hit apply. Now if I open the image, I can just assign that one, and you can see that it's a little bit too big, so I'm gonna make it maybe 75 or maybe 60. That should do it. You can see that if I make the position y0, it would go to the top left corner. That's because the pivot here is automatically being set to the top left, and that's being controlled here. I'm going to quickly place this exactly where I want, and I'm going to disable the control child size width, and now I can control the width of this one, and I'm going to make it slightly less like that, and I'm going to select the image and move it outside the bounds of the option text. So now I can go back and make it left aligned. Now I have choice 1 as my option. So if I disable this one, it would automatically make it shrink. I'm gonna rename this to option text, and I'm gonna put some random text there. And if I duplicate it, I can create multiple options. And this is going to be the highlight. So I'm gonna rename this to highlight and delete this one. And I'm gonna select both of the highlights and disable them as well. So by default, I think we can have one enabled. And once I have that ready, I can go to option text and make it a button by adding a button component. And by adding this, we can create multiple actions inside Playmaker. So if I come to Playmaker, add an FSM, and I'm gonna call this options, just option. And in the empty space here, I can just right click and add a global transition. And you can see that we have different events that we can add. So I'm gonna go for pointer enter. UI pointer is basically your cursor, and this would fire when you're highlighting the text basically. So I'm gonna go to the state and say activate game object, and I'm gonna select the highlight, and I'm gonna add a transition here for the first state as UI pointer exit, and that's basically gonna disable our highlight. So if I hit play, you can see that if I hover over this text area, you can see that the highlight is activating. That's exactly what we need. And you can do all sorts of stuff like slowly animating the highlight image, etc. But we're gonna leave it at this. So I'll delete the other option, and we can just duplicate these and see if that's working properly. And it's working properly. You can also have one option selected by default, but we're not getting into the details of that. Alright, so now we have the options ready, and we can save these as prefabs. So if I go to Nightstone series, and here I'm gonna go for resources. Here I'm gonna create a new folder called prefabs, and in this one I'm gonna click and drag the dialog text and the option text. So once we have them as prefabs, we can just delete all of the content inside the dialog box and have it modularly placed during runtime, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. So the issue here is that there are two types of interactions, one with just the text, and once the text is over, the player would get options, but the options panel won't usually have the text inside it. It would just be something like this, and once you select that, there would be a response for that. So now that's done, I will add a sample dialog text here, and I'm gonna change the size of the dialog box a little bit. I'm gonna test the dialog box a little bit by adding the prefabs during runtime. So you can see that there's an issue where the highlight is going away. So what we can do here is have a margin for the left side. So I'm gonna add about 100, and that's gonna work properly. So I'll just quickly make that change. So we'll go to extra settings for the text mesh pro object, and I'm gonna add 100 here. I'm gonna get the highlight position and move it inside the box, and I think that should do perfectly. I'm gonna go to overrides, and make sure you always do this when you're modifying a prefab. And I'm gonna hit apply all, and I'm gonna delete this one. So now if I hit play, it should automatically have that space, and we should be able to select the options and click on them as well. But we haven't added any click events yet. But you can see that the slight change of color is present from the button component. So we'll be adding that functionality now.